So the KOTOR Combat system, it's a system that, you know, if you weren't someone that was growing up in the Dungeons & Dragons era, or someone that hasn't actually looked at it properly, then it may not make a whole lot of sense to you. Especially since all the damage stuff has ranges when you look at weapons such as 2 to 12 for vibroblades. But that's not quite how it works, and it's not that simple. Actually, it's overly complicated if you really want to go into it. But in this video, I'm going to try and dive into it as much as I can, but also try and keep it as simple as possible, just so all you guys can understand the basics of how it works. And then once you understand the basics, you can obviously dive into more complex, you know, weapons, ways, and things that will help you deal more damage overall, dealing more consistent damage and having a better overall time in the game. So the first two key things we've got to look at is attack and defense. Essentially how this works is both sides will roll a 20-sided dice, and if you roll higher than your opponent, you hit if you're attacking, and then if the defense rolls higher, then the attack misses. And obviously rolls will then be affected by all penalties and modifiers. So if you roll a 12 but you've got +2 attack modifier, it's 14. Pretty simple. When you roll a 20, you have a guaranteed chance to hit, and when you roll a 1, it's a guaranteed miss. Pretty much you always have a maximum chance of 95% to hit, no matter what the roll is, mainly because of that probability. So attacking and defense, simply put, if attack is higher than defense, you hit. If attack is lower than defense, you miss. Or if it is equal to. Each class has a different base attack. Soldier, Guardian, and Combat Droids, their base attack level is basically their level. So for example, level 12 is they have 12 base attack. For all other classes, they have 75% of their level. So for example, if you're level 12, you just times that by 0.75 or 75%, which is 9 base attack. So now that we know what gives us our base attack, what's going to give modifiers to our attack. So if you're dual wielding, and we're assuming you have put nothing into 2-weapon fighting, your main hand will have a -6 or -4 modifier afflicted to it, and your offhand will have a -10. To counter negative effects, you obviously would give yourself two-handed weapons in order to negate the effects, and you'd make your things balanced. You have balanced and unbalanced weapons. All blaster pistols, double-bladed lightsabers, melee weapons, short lightsabers, etc. will all make you balanced, which essentially just gives you a +2 at your main weapon hand. So if you're at master level two-handed weapons, you will have no negative penalty when wielding dual wield. Your offhand will still have negative. Both the power attacks, the power attack, jumping attack, and power blast have a -3 penalty across the board, no matter what level it is, from base to master. And feats such as rapid shot or flurry have -4, -2, and then -1 penalties at master level. Essentially halves every time you upgrade it. Now there are positive modifiers such as force jump, only the improved and master version though, whilst weapon focus will give you a +1 modifier, for example. An important thing to know when building your characters in order to have the best out of combat, you need to upgrade your strength. Strength is added to the attacking roll when you use melee weapons or lightsabers when it's equal or greater than dexterity. Dexterity will affect the attack roll when you use a ranged weapon or a lightsaber and it's greater than strength. Just remember, dexterity will not affect vibroblades. Some weapons will affect bonuses to attack rolls, and certain things like battle stimulants. So a battle stimulant base 1 will give you +1 to your attack roll. There are also things that will inflict negatives. So for example, the dark side power slow will actually reduce the attack roll to your opponent by -2. So that's always something to keep in mind. Now you think you've got all this normal basic maths out of the way, well it actually gets a little bit more complicated. Like I said, when you roll 20 you're guaranteed to hit, but what it doesn't tell you is after that you have a threat percentage chance to do a critical hit. So if you get roll 20 and then you're in the threat percentage chance, you can roll again, and if that hits then you will do more damage. It's basically a critical hit. It basically just multiplies it when it's higher than your opponent's defense. However, a threat roll can't automatically miss, so the conversion rate is a little different. But that maths is a slightly bit more complicated, and it's probably best if we don't go too deep into that, But obviously if you want to be looking into that, I will leave a link into the description which goes into a lot of detail about the attacking on KOTOR. Now that we've got all the attack part out of the way, let's look at your character's defense. So if your defense is higher than your opponent's, you're not getting hit or you're not going to take a lot of damage. Every character starts with a base defense of 10. Body armor adds to defense, but it can also restrict how much dexterity you have. For example, armors will have a +5 dexterity bonus, which restricts the dexterity to +5. Even if you can create more dexterity than that on your character, it's capped off. Some characters actually get bonuses to their defense. So Scoundrels, Sentinels and the Droid Logistics upgrades, when you hit max level for these upgrades at level 12, you get +6 defense bonus, which is pretty cool. And some feats and powers can also boost and negate defense. So like I said earlier, with slow, like it reduces attack, it also reduces your defense by 2. On the flip side, Force Burst, the very powerful one, will give you +4 defense when you're at master level. Now, boosted defense can only hit a max of +10. So for example, you can't do Force Speed, Force Master or Armor even, and wear robes to get +15 defense. It will cut off at 10. However, assuming an opponent uses a critical hit, for example, which takes away 5 defense from you, if you have that excess 5 just sat in the background, it will then get added on and it will count out the negative effects. So instead of losing that -5, it simply just stays at 10. So even though it won't get added on, if something tries to take away your defense, it will then get added on because it's then less than 10. I know it's a lot of information just getting thrown and it sounds quite weird and quite random, but once you look at it for a few seconds, I promise it does make a lot of sense. So just to quickly summarise our defense, higher defense than attack means you won't get hit. Your max defense cannot exceed 10, but if it does exceed 10, it will help negate any negative things that are inflicted upon you. Simple as that. Now, looking at damage. Now you may be thinking, well, we just looked at attack. Well, attack isn't actually damage. Attack is accuracy in this situation. Accuracy being the chance to hit your opponent. Now, you get damage like physical damage from vibroblades, and you get energy damage caused by lightsabers and blasters. Damage is calculated by a dice system again, with dice being rolled in the background, and it works on averages across all dice. Dice are calculated when you see your weapon description and it has something like 2 to 12, like it does for vibroblades. The lower number, the 2, is the lowest you can roll, and that is essentially the amount of dice that you are rolling. So like I said, 2 to 12 means you're rolling 2 dice which have 6 sides, whilst a 1 to 12 weapon, such as the longsword, is 1 dice with 12 sides. A lot of maths goes into working out your damage in that, so I'll just try and keep this as simple as I can using the example of the longsword 1 to 12 and the vibroblade 2 to 12. So a 1 to 12 weapon has the same chance of rolling a 1 as it does a 7 as it does a 12. Which means everything is the 1 in 12 chance, because it works on averages. And that essentially means if I'm using a 1 to 12, I'm more likely to do the 12 than if I was using a 2 to 12. However, if you want more consistent rolls and you want more consistent damage, the 2 to 12 has a higher chance of rolling a 7, 1 to 6, than the longsword does, which will always be a 1 to 12, so it has double the chance of rolling a 7, which should be higher. So when you're playing KOTOR, if you want more consistent damage across your game completely, you want to have as many dice as possible to create a higher average, so to speak. Now, of course, because it can't be very simple, we also have damage modifiers. Different weapons will deal more damage to certain enemies or shields. So, for example, Ion will deal double damage to shields than it does for anything else. Feats such as the strength modifier, weapon specialization, sneak attack, they all add to the overall damage that a character can do. You also get bonus damage from things such as the power attack, shot feats, when you're using force jump, etc. It's also important to note that strength modifiers and weapon modifiers also are used when doing the critical hit, which I explained earlier is when you roll the 20 and then it does that other roll, assuming you're in the parameters. Now you may be thinking, well, we've done the attack part of damage, now obviously we are now going to go to the defense part of damage. So damage immunity. Certain armors and belts will negate certain element types. For example, Thermal Shield Generator gives a 100% fire immunity. Obviously that's less important than shields as your main protector, but I just thought I'd mention it just so you're aware. Certain shields are good for vitality protection, essentially gives you extra health, whilst others do environmental. So for example, the Verpine Shield, which we know is the best shield in the game for environmental things, will give you protection against energy, sonic, cold and heat, 120 points worth, so it's good against lightsabers, blasters, etc. Pretty much all shields will do environmental, except the Mandalorian shields. Mandalorian shields will protect you against physical damage, essentially just gives you extra vitality, with the Mandalorian Power Shield being the higher of the two, offering 30 protection against all types, with the Melee Shield being 20 and then only protect you against 3 of the 4. If you've ever played KOTOR, you're probably told, get toughness as your very first feat. Well, that is something you 100% want to do, it's the king of feats. Toughness essentially increases both your attacking capabilities and also your defense. At master level, it reduces all damage you're taking by 2, but it can also increase the damage you're inflicting up to 5 times as much in some cases. So like we say, get toughness, it's the king of all feats in KOTOR. Lastly, we've got damage resistance. Now some armors and belts will have this little -5 dash little symbol. For example, in Bendrick's belt, the 5 dash negative symbol to bludgeoning. All this means if someone deals bludgeoning damage, which isn't that common but it occurs, the overall damage will happen. So for example, let's say they do 15 damage, that's all bludgeoning. His belt will actually take away 5 from that overall damage, so they'll only deal 10 damage to you. That's probably the most simple maths we've had in this entire thing. Of course, this obviously goes across a bunch of different things, such as his armband will protect you against slashing. Some armors will protect you for like a -25, etc, etc. Obviously, you know, depending who you're fighting, depends on what armor's best for you in that situation. Obviously, you're going to pick and choose when you use what, but that's essentially how damage resistance works. Lastly guys, I promise I'm keeping this as simple as I can, but the game difficulty will also be affecting the damage that enemies will deal to you when you're fighting them in game. So for example, we've got easy, normal and hard. On normal, everything is normal. If they're going to do 15 damage according to the dice, then they'll do 15 damage. However, that's different for easy and hard. So for easy mode, let's assume they roll 10 damage to you overall. Well, on easy mode, they actually have a 50% damage thing to them, so they'll lose 50%. So, for example, they deal 10, they'll actually only deal 5. On the flip side, if you're on hard, they have a 150% damage modifier, so if they deal 10, like I just said, they'll actually deal 15 instead. So that's how the game makes it harder and easier, depending on your difficulties. Well guys, I've tried to keep that as simple as possible, but to summarise, attack and defense, all done by 20-sided dice rolls, then added or subtracted modifiers. Damage is done by the lowest number and the highest number, and then based on averages. And then all damage modifiers are then added on or subtracted afterwards. Hopefully that has been really simple and easy for you guys. I know when, you know, I was definitely reading up on this and trying to, you know, actually understand every little bit of damage, it can be quite complicated, and obviously this video is keeping it to very bare basics, but I'll leave a link in the description if you want to read about how all this works, but it is essentially just a whole lot of maths. But my name has been British Gaming, I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you all next time.